Joining us now is the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, Congresswoman Karen Bass of California. Congressman, your caucus earlier called on Northam to resign. Did he say anything today to change your mind?
No, he just made it worse. The idea that he's going to come out yesterday and say that he was in the picture, today deny it, and then on top of it to say that he hopes that people would make a distinction between wearing blackface and imitating Michael Jackson. And because he wasn't standing next to someone in the Klan, he is completely tone deaf. Then to say that his nickname of Coon Man, he doesn't know where that came from or how that appeared. This was not a 16 or 17-year-old boy. This is a person who graduated medical school in the early 1980s, when there was a tremendous amount of activity around Jesse Jackson's campaign, the anti-apartheid movement. It was not the 30s, the 40s, or the 50s. So it is inexcusable, and I think that he absolutely should resign, and clearly he's lost all support.
I'm glad you point out, because Northam made the argument that blackface wasn't viewed in 1984 the same way it is now. I'm glad you point out the fact that 1984 wasn't all that long ago. Let's listen to what he said.
While I did not appear in this photo, I am not surprised by its appearance in the EVMS yearbook. In the place and time where I grew up, many actions that we rightfully recognize as abhorrent today were commonplace.
That is just a lie. I am sorry, but that is a lie. In 1984, there was a tremendous amount of activity and enthusiasm and excitement over the possibility of the first African-American president. There is no way in the world he can say that he didn't know better. Now, I also question both schools as well. You know, how inappropriate it was for them to even allow those kind of photographs in a yearbook. But right now, it was his responsibility. He took responsibility yesterday. He retracted it today. But you know, the other thing I think is that why didn't he come forward years ago? Why didn't, since he has such great relations in the community, why didn't he sit down with black clergy and say, you know what, I did something when I was younger, it was really stupid, I'm sorry. If no one had discovered this, he would have continued on. In a way, it's like he hid this and only acknowledged it when he was exposed. No excuse.
So this was 35 years ago, clearly unacceptable. But when does somebody deserve a second chance? What would allow Northam to move beyond this?
Well, you know what? He kind of had an opportunity today. And I think that he made it absolutely worse today. But in this environment that we have lived in the last 2 years, where we have the leadership of our country essentially, you know, not objecting, if not promoting policies that have unleashed a level of racism in this country that we haven't seen in a long time, this is not the time period to allow this to continue. And if he is sincere about the state of Virginia, then he should allow the state of Virginia to heal by stepping down. That is the only dignified thing to do.
I know how personal this is to you. When you talk about it in the sense of what this means to the party, African Americans reliably vote Democrat. Do you think the Democratic Party deserves that support, that the party has earned African American support?
Well, you know, I mean, we have basically a two-party system in our country, period. And if you're going to compare the Democratic Party with the Republican Party, absolutely the Democratic Party deserves the support of African Americans. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that African Americans should not hold the Democratic Party accountable. And I am glad that every aspect of the Democratic Party leadership is on the same page calling for him to step down.
If Northam resigns, he'll be replaced by Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax. Fairfax would be the second black governor in Virginia's history. How significant is that?
I think that is very significant. I think it's very appropriate. You know, again, I mean, the state of Virginia has a day in which they celebrate Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee before Martin Luther King holiday. You know, the governor came out very strong after Charlottesville, talking about getting rid of Confederate monuments, and then he backtracked on that. And so I think that it would be extremely appropriate. I know that the lieutenant governor is very, very popular in the state, and I think it would be a tremendous step toward healing for him to take over. It should be Governor Fairfax at this point.
Do you see any path forward in which Northam is able to stay in office and govern effectively?
I really don't. No, I really don't. I mean, I don't think that, how could you possibly trust him? And just imagine, you know, the African-American elected officials in that legislative caucus, our two members, Don McEachin and Bobby Scott. I mean, these are people that knew him for years and years. Can you imagine the sense of betrayal that they feel? How could he possibly have credibility to govern? Yesterday he was in the picture, today he wasn't, but oops, I did blackface, but doing blackface as Michael Jackson is completely different. He's lost credibility.
What does a picture like that do to you? When you see those images, how does that make you feel as a black woman?
I mean, honestly, it's painful, but it makes you just want to have a big sigh. Because how many years, how many decades, how many centuries do we have to continue going through this? This is why it is so important. The leadership of our country needs to lead in a way that heals. And unfortunately, that's not the situation that we're in right now. So if this was just about the governor, that would be one thing. But just think about it. A week before the last election, we had 4 acts of domestic terrorism. And not each one, but almost each one of those acts was racially motivated. What about the African Americans that were killed in Kentucky? The man wanted to go to a church, couldn't get there. A couple of days later, the massacre in the synagogue. 3 days after that, the yoga studio. We are going through a period in our country right now that is extremely painful, which is why we need the leadership. And so maybe if this had happened at some other point in time, there would have been, he could have redeemed himself. But especially at this moment in our history with everything that is happening, the only thing for him to do is to gracefully, in a dignified manner, apologize and say, I need to step down.
Congresswoman Karen Bass, really great to have your voice on our show tonight on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much.